We are back, Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Brew site, coming to you on Wednesdays from 11 to 11:50. Glad to be able to do so, and you see the banner behind us. The Comenius Institute is what supports Warp and Woof Radio. At the Comenius Institute, we cross 3 bridges. The first bridge is into college, and that college ministry is at IUPUI, where I help young Christian college students think Christianly about their studies. I actually have a great opportunity to teach there as well, and teach with a fantastic group of faculty on the campus. Grateful to be there. The second bridge that we cross is into community, which is what we're doing right now, and the whole point of that is the radio show. We've been doing this for 4 years, have over 200 episodes. We've had over 250 guests with us over all of that time. You can find our stuff on iTunes with the Comenius Institute or Warp and Woof Radio, also at our websites, comeniusinstitute.org.com and warpandwoof.org. That's warpandwoof.org. Find all of our broadcasts there, some archived Facebook footage there as well. The third bridge we cross is into culture. So every Tuesday, for instance, something called Truth in 2 comes out. And Truth in 2 is a Christian truth in 2 minutes. This last week, for instance, this week's actually is on complet equality. I made up a new word, decided that we needed something to segue complementarianism with equality and helping people to understand that both are true, that we complement each other and we're both equal with each other. And of course, that was the beginning of Women's History Month. Picture of my wife, Robin, and I on the cover of that particular episode. And then it just is so obvious that we need to begin our month on the radio show with Women's History Month again. And so we have with us here today a very important person who has just written a book. Her name is Angie Ward. Make sure that you go out, run out, and get a copy of this. This is from Nav Press. I Am a Leader. Angie Ward, we're really grateful to have you here today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be back.
Oh, that's wonderful. We had a wonderful opportunity with you and a number of other women from around Indianapolis who are doing good in the community a few years ago, and that was a great show. That's archived someplace as well, I think. We can go back and grab that stuff. But I'm holding this up again for everybody to see. This is an important book, I think, for everybody to understand, not just simply in leadership studies, but specifically, I think, what your calling has been for a long time is to emphasize women's leadership. Mm-hmm. And that's really crucial. So why don't you just give us an overview of why women in leadership? I mean, you know, you and I could probably pontificate on this for an hour, but right. Give us an overview of why this is such an important topic and book. Important. I think it's always been an important topic. I think but the last few years it's been really risen to the surface, issues of power and the Me Too and then the Church Too movement. And so I actually started working on this book before all of that blew up. It just happens, the book happens to drop right in the middle of these conversations. But and then, you know, the Christian side, you've got John MacArthur telling Beth Moore to stay home or to go home, you know, and I mean, and so there's just a lot of conversation, a lot of emotion, a lot of questions, and really this comes out of my own journey as a woman and as a leader, and how do those things fit, and what is calling. And so it really started with just my own journey and reflection, and then hopefully now, you know, a book that can be helpful to a lot of other women and men during this time of heightened conversation about Absolutely. This, you know, kind of leads us easily into telling us about who you are, what you do, and this brand new opportunity that's coming up here.
Yeah. So I currently live here in Indianapolis, not for long. I'll talk about that in a minute. But so I'm a ministry, let's see, I wear many hats. So ministry and leadership writer, teacher, coach, consultant, mom, pastor's wife, variety of hats at different times, but all under the broader kind of umbrella of leadership development for ministry leaders, for men and women. I kind of fell into the leadership book for women, but also work with a lot of different churches and teach at different schools as you do, and that's, I think, how we first met,
right.
Doing that. So that's what I've been doing, working from home, writing, doing some speaking, teaching, that type of stuff. My husband's a pastor, but as you mentioned, in actually 3 weeks, I am hitting the road I'm going first with the dog and our stuff to Denver, Colorado, and then Dave, my husband, will join me about a month after that. We feel God's call and direction, and just a lot of confirmation for us to go out there. I'm going to start a position at Denver Seminary as assistant director of their Doctor of Ministry program. Somebody said, that's a lot of words. We like a lot of words in the academy. But
Yes,
working with doctoral students, helping them with their research, helping provide leadership administration in the program, and then doing some teaching as well. And that's where my husband and I met and married, so we're looking forward to getting back there.
Getting back, almost back home.
In some ways, yeah. It's been a while, but with a lot of connections there.
That's really wonderful. Just so everybody realizes, this is huge for us, I think, to have Angie in a position of leadership in a conservative evangelical seminary. Let me just be right out front and say that. Quite frankly, it's one of those things that's been long past due, and I'm just thrilled that it's you.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
I'm very excited about just Denver Seminary and where it's going and opportunities there, and looking forward to impacting men and women classroom and student programs. Yeah.
And so, since you've emphasized that a couple times, let me just suggest here's the subtitle: When Women Discover the Joy of Their Calling, which I think is an important point to make with everybody. That if you're a woman who is thinking about these kinds of issues as it relates to leadership, I mean, this is the book for you. So you want to jump on this and have a read that I think is really going to be an encouragement. One of the things that stood out to me, and speaking of women who were in the book, I loved the fact that you did all of these interviews. So at the end of the book, everybody, there are the names of all of these individuals, just first names, but there's 3 columns of it.
Yeah, there's over 50.
There's over 50 people that were invested in this thing.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, that was one of my favorite parts of the book. So why don't you tell us, a story or two about some of these ladies who invested some time with you, maybe some things that stood out to you as important to say to folks that, hey, this is what others have gone through, and you might be going through this too.
Yeah. Wow. Where to begin? So many stories.
Sure.
And I say in the book, I'm just so honored that they allowed me to kind of carry and share their stories for the book. So I talked to a bunch of different women. I asked them questions like, just what's your experience with calling and living that out, and what does that look like for you? Just as I was trying to make sense of that for my own life and for the book. And so somebody yesterday said, well, it was my favorite part of the book, and that's my favorite as well. It's just having all those different voices in there. And got to talk to women of all ages, different ethnicities, all sorts of geographic locations around the world, actually.
Wow.
All sorts of seasons of life and stages and types of ministry. And so, I have a woman in Australia who's with a nonprofit, a parachurch ministry, and her husband has some chronic has some major health issues. And so, like she said, this isn't how I designed this for us to work things out, and so, but this is how God is working through our story, and then I've got, talked to some young moms who are late 20s, early 30s, and they've been told by a lot more people, you can do anything you want, you can be anything, which is great. They're getting more of that, message, and then they're realizing I may have the opportunity, and some of that generations ahead may not have had, but I still have my own limitations, and coming to terms with that, and my husband jokes about how I can make people cry by the questions I ask. I'll try not to do that to you.
Oh, please.
I don't think I'm in the interviewee seat today, but it was just I felt like it was sacred space with each of these women, hearing their stories, and as they reflected and knew that, there were a lot of holy and emotional moments, and that just powerful. Yeah. Sharing that, and so I was just encouraged, just hearing God's faithfulness through their stories, and we just bonded through that experience. There's very much a shared sisterhood, and one of the things I write early in the book is I want women, influencers, which is how I define leadership, to realize that they're unique, but they're not alone. And I think sharing these stories, was another piece of that, and talking with these different women, and just learning from their wisdom. That's the strength of the book, is just their collective wisdom, I think.
Sure. Well, it certainly stands out. I mean, when you go to the back of the book and you see these 50-plus names, it's really impressive. One of the things that stood out to me as I'm reading the reading of my book, I have to read a couple sections here that just kind of stood out to me. The final option is to take a leap of faith and trust God to provide. Indeed, according to Os Guinness, holy folly is central to the call of discipleship, and believers are often called to be obedient without knowing the final outcomes. Holy folly?
Well, that's what he says. So, yeah, yeah. It's kind of the wisdom of God seems foolish to man, and so in there, was that the chapter on money, or I can't remember, or maybe on challenges. It's like
money. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely times where things don't make sense on the outsider to like the rational mind, but it's clear that God's moving in that.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
I just loved it that you quoted Os Guinness on that one, especially that line, holy folly.
Yeah,
I think
this is such a great description because it's craziness, but there's a holiness.
Yeah.
God-givenness.
Yeah. And, your connection, of course, to 1 Corinthians is huge there. And I'm just going to continue on because now you quote Dallas Willard in the same paragraph.
I got to get all the heavyweights.
Well, yeah, you brought it.
Yeah,
you brought
exactly.
it. You did not bring it weak.
Yeah.
This is good. So Dallas Willard points out, however, that faith is not actually a wild, desperate leap. It's confidence grounded in reality. And then you write, in other words, when believers orient their lives around God's principles, a leap is not really a blind jump, but rather a clear next step. And I love that clear next step line because that really is what we really talk about. While we believe in a supernatural realm that controls and oversees providence and sovereignty, at the same time, we recognize we have responsibilities here on earth. So it was really kind of cool to see your emphasis on the holy folly and then the confidence that we can have, even when we're living on the planet, that we might not always know next steps. Yeah,
I think we mythologize or mysticize calling so much. There has to be this grandiose thing, and it's like, and by faith Abraham left his people and did this big thing, and God sometimes does that, but and it calls us as something that just a lot of times that holy folly. But if you're walking with him, which he wants us more than what we can do for him, and so if we are walking step by step with him, it's just that next step, and so in the book I say, like, what is your next thing? It could just be a phone call. It could be, it's not necessarily, oh my gosh, I've got to sell everything and do this and leave this and that kind of thing. It's like, okay, what's the next step? And even in my own situation right now, we're packing our house, we're getting ready to move. We've got a house in Denver. We've been some work on it, so I'm managing projects long distance plus the book and all that. And so I'm laying there at night and feeling the stress level just rising, and my breaths get shorter and shallower. And God goes, "Your next thing is to sleep."
There you go.
You're not going to be able to pack your house right now at 2 a.m, or you don't need to.
No.
The other things will wait. You go to bed. So like, that's my next thing, So he's reminding me of my own writing.
Yeah, and the limitations. And since you bring this up, I have to say, one of the things that you write about, and I write page numbers. And
I see your notes.
There. Yeah. So page 49 on women speak, and just before I say that about the thing I wanted to say, I feel like I'm all over the place here. I'm just so excited about this book. That one of the cool things that you did with this book was this kind of I don't know what kind of a page coloring that is. It's kind of like a backdrop.
I know, that's my designer, people. Isn't that cool?
It's really cool. So, look at this page, it's just a little bit discolored, and it stands out in a way that was really attractive to me. Anyway, one of the individuals here talked about the issue of relocation. And you're about to relocate, and this particular story that's being told is being told about a pastor and a wife. Why don't you tell everybody about your situation? Because you are in a unique situation where you are the one now with a full-time job.
Yeah.
So explain all that.
The wife and the pastor.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Tell everybody.
Yeah. So, and feel free to ask additional questions if I'm getting off track. But so I'm taking this position at Denver Seminary. Dave and I felt a stirring that there was maybe a next for us in ministry. We didn't know what that would look like or what that was going to be. We were in Colorado last fall for a month of study leave, which had been planned a year prior, and went to Denver because we had friends there, and Dave's focus was studying and preaching, and that was a good place near Denver Seminary to do that. And during our time out there toward the end of that, I was approached about a possibility of this position, of this kind of newly formulated position, and Dave was encouraging from the get-go, and he's always been very supportive, very encouraging, not only with this book, but other ministry and types of things. But I should say, not but. And as we came to this empty nest season of our kids being at Indiana University now, as Dave and I were talking about that, I said, when our last one went off to college in the fall, you went to work the very next day and your life changed very little. You went in the office like you normally do, you preached on Sundays. My life has shifted dramatically as far as my primary time and even in some ways my identity. I'm not Taylor Jameson's mom now, and so we just started praying about the way we put it is we wanted both of us to have exclamation marks over our calling. And so Dave's still in process of what his exclamation point will be. He's talking to several different churches, but as I was sharing with you, before we started this broadcast, a few months ago, and he shared this multiple times, he felt God saying, Dave, your calling is not more important than Angie's just because you're a pastor, or that you're not more called to ministry just because you're a pastor. And he'll say, I never would have said that or espoused that, I don't think in my heart I really believe that, but it was just kind of a reminder for him. And so he's been the one really encouraging me and saying, he said to me, this is your time to shine, and I'm praying, and he is too. He's trusting that there's a thing for him as well. And if the current churches he's talking with don't work out, he said, I really feel good, like I know it's a season of preparation for my next, whatever that is. So,
yeah.
But I think it's the reality that our calling is always lived out in these systems of family and other relationships. And so he has his and I have mine, and we've tried to navigate over many years what's the his and the mine and the ours to that. And the model that I had was my youth pastor and his wife, and they were very much a team. And that's how I think I thought that was the way and the only way. And Dave and I are very much a team in some pieces, but there's some ways that we're wired differently and from each other and from other married and ministry couples that we know. And so painting is one thing we can't do well together for our marriage. I mean, every couple has their thing, right? Sometimes it's making the bed or painting or to repairs. And there's certain leadership stuff where both of us are good and strong leaders, and we're bumping and we restrict each other by being in too close proximity. Yeah. And so it's been a journey of figuring that out, and this is for us for now piece of it, for what it looks like for us.
Right. Just to say this, I'm interested. I don't think I asked you about this earlier, so I hope this is okay to ask. But Angie has a PhD. I just want everybody to know that, because I think that's really important to know that she has a doctorate. So why didn't you have that on the front of the book?
Well, first of all, I joke. I only make Dave call me Dr. Ward in public. My kids, I'm just kidding. We just joke about that all the time. Yeah,
that's good.
We talked about with the publisher, and I think it's when we're in some of the publicity stuff, we're saying Dr. Angie Ward, but I think there was an accessibility piece that we decided not to. So, like for my academic stuff, it's Angela J. Ward, PhD, and then for this stuff, I'm just Angie. I mean. Yeah. Because there also is this reality of this power distance thing that happens, Dr. Ethel, right?
Yeah, right.
So, and...
Well, I just wanted everybody to realize that Dr. Ward is a brilliant teacher, professor, researcher. She's going to be helping the next generation of ministry students step out into the real world and deal with the issues that they're going to face. And, my view of things like this is always to, lift everybody up and want to make sure that you get the acclaim that's necessary. And so that's really important and powerful to us. We're going to be taking a one-song break here, but when we come back, we're going to have our second segment here with Angie Ward, talking about her book, I Am a Leader. Make sure that you run out and grab a copy of this from Nav Press. We're grateful for the good press folks out there doing such great work in this book Thankful for Angie being here, doing good in the community. About now to go out to Denver. So we're going to take that one song break. We'll be right back. We stay on Facebook Live. I just tell everybody that.
Okay.
Just to remind everybody that we're still live. So, yeah, there you go. And I always ask everybody, just as we start the second segment, or before we do, where would you like to go from here? I mean, I've got lots of notes I can go.
You will take it, whatever your notes are. You know your audience. Yeah, I'm happy to answer whatever.
I was thinking that I wanted to make sure to talk about disequilibrium.
Yes. Good teaching term,
I
right?
really like that. And, of course, being uncomfortable. And just as a side comment, though, it's always important, the thoroughly biblical emphasis that you see all the way through this is really powerful. But I also wanted to ask you to talk about this phrase that I see a number of times in the book, felt God's call. What does that mean?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's really important for everybody to know about. There's another phrase in here where you talk about intentional community and how important that is. And, you and I, of course, have the same kind of view of how this ought to happen, do stuff alone, do stuff together with other people. What were some of the other things? Oh, I love the benedictions.
Oh, thank you.
Oh,
yeah.
Man, that was so cool. I love those because I'm a big benediction guy. So I
figured
Angie.
For your liturgical types, I
Yeah,
threw that in
that's
there
right.
for you.
Yeah, I felt like almost crossing myself or something.
Yeah.
Let's see. And then the section on, just as a side note, continuing conversation at the end of each chapter. I really like that too, where, this is, I said this stuff, but here's some more things for you.
Well, as a teacher, I have to
have
time to discuss and apply, right?
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, reflective questions.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and study guides are not as much a thing anymore for books, as you know. So, but more and more appropriate.
I think that's really wise to do it that way, and at the end of the chapter or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I really liked everything that I saw in here.
Thank you.
How has been the process of the marketing, the breakout?
It's been good because we use kind of a co-marketing arrangement with Christianity, with CT, Leadership Journal and stuff, because they were originally going to publish it as like a single author book, which they don't really do much of. And then they had some transition and some editors a couple of years ago before Tim Dillon came there, but they said, we don't really do this well, and we think you should think bigger. So then they helped introduce me to some folks at IVP and NAB, and through that, and then eventually ended up with NAB, even though some other publishers looked at it and stuff. Good. So there's like a full page ad in the newest CT and the print version, and their live blog, they did an interview with me yesterday.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, so I think it's been good. As of this morning, I think it was 19th or 20th, and right now in Amazon Christian Leadership paperback. So I guess that's good. I don't know. I mean,
when you get ranked, it's good.
Yeah. I'm higher than Al Mohler.
There you go,
so
Al.
My work's complete. Yeah, he was at number 56. Yeah.
Oh my word, that's hilarious.
Yeah, no, I was like a pretty heady company that's on some great books on that list. So I don't know how long I'll stay on it, but it's fun to be in their company right now.
It's fun,
Rare air.
It's nice to have a team behind you. Obviously, you've got some.
NAB's been great. It's been such a good fit. They really are discipleship focused publisher. And
but you have
through the process.
I think the thing that stood out to me beyond the publisher was all of the folks behind the scenes that are on that Facebook page that you've got going on.
Yes. Yeah. So the launch team person. So and then Tyndale does they have an alliance thing with Navigators. So with Nav Press, do the marketing of things. So but it's all under it's all under the umbrella of Nav Press. But so they had a good team and a publicist and all that kind of thing. Nice. So they've been very supportive of the book and done some really cool things to get the word out. So
the obvious next question for those of us who write is, so when's the next book coming out?
Well, I don't know when it will come out. I'm working on the next proposal.
Good.
Yeah, one about the church. So, but I don't have a good working title for my book yet.
Okay.
And so yesterday I was trying to explain it on a video of the live launch, virtual launch, and I was like, it's going to be more interesting than I'm making it sound right now. I really hope so.
That's okay. Yeah.
And then the other concept I'm also looking at is powerless leadership. I know. The working title for this other one is Searching for Church, and then Powerless Leadership.
Yeah, I'll buy it for the title.
All right. Well, that's all you got a good title. That we're like, this is a great title. I'm
Yeah.
a leader. Yeah, I love it. And the cover's gorgeous. They nailed it.
Yeah, I think the simplicity of it, that's what kept standing out to me about this book, was the title. It's just so simple.
Yeah, and the original concepts, we realized that they need to market it as a leadership book, not a
Right.
women's book. And so
Yes.
the original concepts were more like silhouettes of kind of women and very dreamy, that kind of thing. And I kind of jokingly refer to it as, I'm leader girl Barbie. But
Okay.
this is a painting by a guy. You know?
Okay.
Yeah, and they just zoomed in on it.
Nice. Good. We come in after this commercial. Thanks for hanging in there with us, Facebook Live peeps.
You know,
Appreciate that.
inside dirt at Facebook.
Right. And we are back for the second segment with Dr. Angie Ward. Thanks ever so much for joining us here today or later on the podcast. For those of you who are listening on earbuds sometime past this particular day on the 5th of March, we're grateful to have Angie here with us talking about her book, I Am a Leader. And Angie, as in the first segment, was telling us that she is on her way out to Denver Seminary for a position there. And we're going to pick back up with the book, some of the things that I noticed in it that I think you're going to be excited to talk about too. So the very first one here that kind of struck me as I began the book was this word that makes me smile just saying it, disequilibrium. Why is disequilibrium in this book?
Well, so first of all, kind of to define, give a little definition,
yes.
disequilibrium is, I mean, that just to lose your sense of kind of equilibrium or kind of feel off balance, basically. And it's, as you know, it's a kind of an educator's term, and it's something, you know, or anybody who writes about change, that type of thing. And so disequilibrium, we hate it, but there's no change and then therefore no growth without it. And so that, and this whole idea of calling often throws you off balance, and following God's call, I mean, it causes you to really have to take step by step. You know, we just talked about like that journey, and not necessarily the leaps, but there's this can be disequilibrating. I can't even say the word. It's such a big word. It's better writing it than having to say it
Sure.
in a conversation. But and so. Yeah, and I say in the beginning that my job as a teacher, I'm a teacher at heart, my writing is teaching, you know, in action. And so is to make you feel a little uncomfortable and to wrestle with some stuff and think through different perspectives. And some of the women's experiences may not line up with yours, or maybe even with your understanding of how it should work, you know. And so in writing that, and just the process of calling that's, you know, the goal is to get a little off balance, because that's when you start to learn and to grow and to shift.
So this is a strange shift, but as soon as you started talking about being off balance or shifting, my mind, for whatever reason, went to basketball. Are you still a North Carolina fan?
I am. And this is a hard season.
Oh,
I know. No, I still am. Yes,
Okay.
I'm Tar Heel wed.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
Just
Yeah.
so you know,
Go Heels.
everybody, the woman, you know, the whole rock and the basketball thing, you know, she's right here.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important just to say out loud.
And I think I put in there that I was a sports writer. I mean, I talk about I was a sports writer. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I love
I'm
that
still-
stuff. Yeah, that's
Love
great.
my hoops.
For whatever reason, I don't know why that came to my mind, but there it is. my audience is probably grinning right now saying, yeah, well, Mark just kind of gets chuckles out of whatever. So this phrase that kind of keeps coming up in the book kind of had me, and I have to ask, because I think it's important for everybody to know, what do you mean when you say felt God's call? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. I should write a book about that. Yeah. You know, and it's kind of an odd combination, felt call instead of a heard call.
Yeah.
And in the book, I talk about, you know, what is calling and how do we hear or feel or understand God's call, and the way I describe it in my experience, and different women in the book had very different experiences, but for me, and I always point to like the back of my ears here, and so I feel like it's like it's a loud, to me it's not an audible voice, but it's a it's almost like somebody tapped me on the shoulder and it's clearly like talking right to me, and it's like so it's not an audible voice to me or to anybody else, but it's still clear, and there are still words for me. Some people have more of an impression. Some people, I know I've actually heard sometimes audible things or seen. God can use natural or supernatural means, but so for me, I say I describe, I do this because that's where I feel it or hear it, and it's like a strong whisper that I know is meant just for me, and usually I know exactly what it means, even if it's not going to be easy, and it's always for me accompanied by great peace in the moment, even if it's a really hard or big or challenging thing that he's telling me to do. Whether it's like you need to have that conversation with that person. We really should repent for that, kind of thing, or I'm going to show you something, kind of thing, and so I think part of the process of discerning calling is just learning to hear the shepherd's voice, and what is he, how does that feel and sound to you, and not that it's only based on emotion, but it's a deep sense of, there's like a deep conviction to it, and a piece where it's not just words up here or just in your head type of thing. There's a I don't know, like an embodiment in your whole body kind of thing, like yes.
If you're getting the sense that it's hard to describe what Angie's experiencing, it's very difficult to describe. So
I'm going to turn it on you. How do you?
Yeah, so good. I was about to actually tell you about that. Yeah. So
how do you experience God's call?
I am a big believer in the Holy Spirit, just so you know.
Good.
I like to make those kinds of statements. Yeah, that's just kind of out there. And I'm also a big believer in Jesus' view of the Holy Spirit. In John chapter 3, where he said, the Holy Spirit is likened to the wind, and who knows where that blows.
Right.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah. It blows where it listeth. I think in the King James.
In the King James, yeah. Listeth always makes me
right.
feel like I'm filling the
yeah. Oh, that's disequilibrium.
Yeah, there it is again. Oh, man. I love laughing during the radio show. So, when people ask me about this, and people have asked, how do you know? I will use one word, and that's the word compulsion. Now, people will say, well, how do you know? And I'll tell them, I don't know. I just know. Yeah. Now, that sounds weird, but it's probably something similar to, you hear it right here.
Yeah.
And that concept, I think, and this is important, if there are folks out there listening who aren't Christians or who haven't been Christians very long, I think this is going to be really difficult for them to grasp, because you have to be committed to this view of life and things, and the change has to have been internalized because of Jesus' salvation in our lives for us to really understand what that feels like.
Yeah, although I think sometimes the longer we follow Christ, or we're kind of in that world of Christianity, sometimes there's a lot of other voices that can drown out the voice of the Holy Spirit as well. Yeah. And sometimes those are internal. It's my own doubts or fears or concerned, or people saying, here's what you should or should not do, and so that's why I said, if it's of God, there's peace, and so like there's perfect love and perfect peace. And so if I start feeling anxious, not that I don't have questions sometimes, but if I start feeling like this, and that's my physical expression of, I guess, of that, then I know it's like, okay, I'm letting my own doubts come in, or I'm listening to other voices that are throwing me off track here, and so there's a deep-seated peace,
Yeah, you just know. And I can't really explain it any further than that, just as much as I don't think anybody really can.
How'd you know that Robin was going to want to marry? You knew, right?
Oh, that's what the North.
I don't need the whole story, right? Exactly.
Yeah, see, this is when if Robin hears this is going to be, I'm going to hear this later. She's going to say,
"Oh no, sorry.
I wish I was there so I could tell the story."
Yeah, right, exactly. But it's a relational thing. You know, and so there's not like a checklist,
right?
That you went, okay, Robin meets all this, Dave meets all this, and so there is a different type of knowing.
It is, yeah. Even the Truth in Two that we put out this week on conflict equality, I write in there about how we don't really think about it, write papers about it. We just live this way.
Mhm.
I can't explain that any further than that.
Yeah.
Frankly, isn't it kind of nice when you just live theology and you don't always have to, be writing papers about it?
Yeah.
You just live it.
Yeah,
That might be important.
Yeah.
You're going to be talking about that in your classes, right?
I already am, yes. Yeah, I know. I'm talking about applied theology versus just your systematics up here.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be. If you can't answer the question, so what? Who cares? Why should I listen to you today? Then there's that.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about intentional community. One of the things that struck me as I was reading this book was about that, and the need to actually, whether it be doing study or an academic work together, or just doing life together in whatever venue. Talk about why that's so important for you.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think in at least modern evangelicalism, it's become so individualistic. And I think, you read throughout the New Testament, and it's a community of people. And even historically in the historical church, the believers were known for how they did life together, not for what they knew necessarily. There's a piece of the doctrine, and watch your life and doctrine closely, and so I think there's a missing communal piece to this idea of calling too, where it's confirmed in community and affirmed by community and people who are seeing you in action, saying, yes, I see God at work through this in your life and in you through this, so I think we just have, this is what I feel, so this is what I'm going to do, and calling is ultimately responsible, to an audience of one. You're a steward of what God has invited you into, but a true community should be stewarding that with you and for you as well. And so, at our church, our leadership, they're responsible for the callings and giftings of those that the people He has entrusted to us as leaders.
These are huge ideas here that for us in a world where there's too many celebrities, and I think the church has fallen into that mood as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, and community also tests and tries calling. It's a place to live it out, and as opposed to just a person with an idea or a person with a dream, or a person with gifts. We often go with gifts and popularity first instead of going, is this really tested in, and his character is also forged in community. It's not just the activity of our calling, but the character of patience and obedience and humility and servitude, service, all those things are confirmed and forged in community.
So as you say those words, it strikes me to just mention Acts 16 and Apollos. We have the husband-wife team who takes him aside and explains the way of Jesus more clearly. But Apollos, even before this, he was this brilliant apologist. Well, after he came out of this meeting with the husband and wife in the community of the church, he was even that much more equipped, better equipped. And nobody could stand up to him. He's this brilliant mind, but he needed that community spirit behind him that says, there's a couple things here that you might need to know about.
Yeah, and so even with Apollos, you see the tendency to want to put people on a pedestal or a platform. I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, kind of thing. And so I think community keeps us grounded and keeps us humble as well. People
are actually, if they actually care about you as leaders, then they're going to actually tell you what's wrong. What does that famous line in Proverbs say? Better, what is it about the wise person? Better the strike against you from a friend than the kisses of an enemy. Right. Yeah. I just think faithful are the wounds of a friend. That's it. Thank you. Yeah, but I think there's one similar too. Yeah. These are powerful ideas, and it's nice to draw some of this stuff out in a book like this because it's important for everybody to realize. I wanted also to just mention that I loved the benedictions in your book, and I want just tell everybody, why did you include a benediction? And maybe for those who don't know what a benediction is, maybe you should explain that too. But we're talking about I Am a Leader. Angie Ward is here with us. So Angie, why did you put benedictions in your book? Well, and so benediction is a lot of times in more liturgical, actually even if not, they just don't call it a benediction. It's kind of a closing and a blessing and a prayer over the people kind of thing. And I just felt
like it needed. This was a holy space in the book. And I'm not trying to like elevate as well, I wrote this holy, scripture kind of thing, but as I wrote it, it was very sacred space, and sharing these stories and almost feeling the experiences of these other women and my own, and reflect my own journey. And God's presence was, I think, in it, and so I felt like I just wanted to. That was one of the first ideas I had. Actually, was just like to leave people with a blessing of, if this is your situation, I want you to know this, or may you this with God, kind of thing, and then close with that benediction. Also from Richard Halverson about calling. But so I wrote the ones before that, and hope they're encouraging. I've heard that they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime anybody ends a book like this, or any kind of speech or something, giving the sense that somebody is actually blessing them with words and with the life that they've been given to do for us.
Yeah, and I feel like those of us who are, if you're reading the book, you become part of the community of this book and reading it, and so it's almost like we have this shared worshipful moment, and so it's like, now go.
Right. And I like that concept. I don't think we talk much about that as authors, do we? About the community of the people that are reading.
Good point. Yeah. I think, again, we individualize. Did you read this book? Well, I read this book. Or maybe we have book clubs, but really, we become transformed together. There's through the process, like we've had a shared experience.
Right. And it strikes me to say that it might be important to recognize the church history is important, and that we become part of that community as well as we're reading church history.
Yeah.
And you're going to be working with Marshall Shelley, whose dad wrote that great book.
Yes, Church History in Plain Language.
Yeah, I love that book.
Yeah.
One of the famous books of Christendom for the common person like me, that, there weren't any pictures, Dr. Seuss wasn't there, but I could have used a picture or two.
And then in benediction, I even say, like, to those who have gone on before, it's like there's this great cloud of witnesses, with us and our calling, and the people of the church and of faith who have gone before, and those who come behind. And so hopefully this is a gift to those who come behind. And
So let's talk about the gift for a moment, because, quite frankly, this is a gift in this day and age. Talk about the intersection between what you've written, what you've taught, this particular book, as it relates to the cultural moment. You mentioned Me Too a moment ago, and maybe some of the megastars of the church that have fallen, those kinds of things. Talk about why a book like this is so important in a time like this.
Well, I don't want to toot my own horn.
Let me toot your horn. This is an important book for this time. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's happened to drop into this culture moment where there's conversations about, just so many conversations about power and what is Christocentric, or like a Christ-centered or Christoform, power. Like what is Jesus' power? That's why I talk about power to less leadership. That's why I started reflecting on that as a possible book down the road. And so, I think we need to kind of step back and instead of fighting for more power, and I think, especially when it comes to like women in leadership or power issues, we view it as a zero-sum game. I mean, we see this with the elections. Last night, as we're recording this, was the Super Tuesday Democratic, primaries, and so we view it. If I give some up, then or if you gain some, I lose some, and there's a limited amount to go around. And so that's why the chapter in Calling and Authority, I really reframe it to accountability and stewardship, and again, community. And these are principles that apply to all of us as believers, men and women, the community of faith, and instead of this power, which is then permission, power over, and permission giving or permission taking away. And so I think our culture, not just church culture and contemporary evangelicalism, but I think our culture needs to see a new way of thinking about power, and like, can you have peaceful power, and that type of, what's the Jesus way in these conversations?
One of the ways that I describe this to students is we've all been given authority, and I show them my open hand, and it rests in my open hand. But as soon as I close my fingers around that open hand, it now becomes a fist to beat you with. So There is. That's why I'm so glad when I read your book and I saw, she's focusing on authority, not power.
Mm-hmm.
And the emphasis on authority is we've all been given authority for everything. I mean, I'm given authority for everything I own, the clothes on my back, whatever. And I think that's important to recognize that this is a Genesis 1:28, and we're supposed to manage and conserve what we've been given.
Then it becomes a stewardship issue.
Now, yes, thank you. So let's kind of tease that out a little bit and talk about the necessity of recognizing that authority is stewardship and your views on those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think, and so I define leadership as influence, and so I say the question is not whether you have it or where, and then how are you going to steward that influence? And so a lot of women and men say, well, I'm not a leader, meaning I'm not in this position, and we view it again as power over, kind of thing on the organizational chart, and I just think this idea of stewardship is so important, such a neglected concept in most of our Christian communities and church, and certainly in the political world, even Christians in politics, and so like what is that just flips everything over, flips it on its head, instead of how to have power and how to get people to do it. How am I going to be called to account and responsible for the people and the gifts and the their callings, and that applies, if you apply that to political leaders, you apply that to church leaders, and you think through some of the major explosions at some larger churches and others. I mean, you just think if that was a stewardship perspective, would that maybe have, if you framed it through that, would that maybe have changed what happened?
Yes.
Instead of what can easily become empire building and too big to fail, and it's like we then become afraid of losing things, and stewardship then is not afraid of truth telling and truth seeking. It's a completely different question.
So the whole emphasis in leadership is not to gain but to give.
Absolutely.
We've been talking with Angie Ward here today, and grateful for her presence. Angie, if you could take 60 seconds to kind of summarize what do you want to leave people with about this great book, I Am a Leader, what would it be?
Oh boy, that's so.
Elevator speech.
Yeah, exactly. For women, you are unique. God has invited you to join Him in this work in this world, and that can look a whole lot of different ways. It doesn't. Don't compare callings or how God calls you or any of that type of thing, how He speaks to you. But also, you are not alone. There's a community of people, of women, of men, who are on this journey with you, just following Christ, seeking to follow Him. And so I hope that women will get that from the book, and I hope that men will also read the book and just understand better what it's like, the unique challenges of being a woman leader. And so that together we're having conversations like this that are non-threatening and non-anxious, but can help us grow together in community with Christ and for Christ.
I think your new venue in Denver is going to provide you lots of opportunities for these kind of conversations. This is Angie Ward's book, I'm a Leader, When Women Discover the Joy of Their Calling, from Nav Press. Make sure that you run out and grab a copy of this. This is fantastic stuff. You don't want to miss the opportunity, especially during Women's History Month, but quite frankly, any day where we need to have good reminders of what it means to be a good leader. So we're grateful for that.
So glad to be on here with you.
Yeah, it's always, it's super to see the smile on your face. That's good. Well, we're going to continue Women's History Month next week when Deja Henry is going to be here with us. Deja is a filmmaker, and she is somebody here in Indianapolis who's making a huge difference in terms of the arts. Very excited to have Deja with us. But of course, we're always grateful to tell you about the folks behind the scenes. H.B. Bell sitting right across the table from me. We're really grateful for his work, obviously, as producer, and the man who has run this program and platform for almost 9 years now. We're grateful to have been a part for 4. And so thanks, HB.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, we have Josh Collingwood, who behind the scenes takes care of all our digitization, HB. HB loves it when I say digitization.
Only a doctor.
Yeah, only a doctor says stuff like that, right? Yeah, so there it is. Josh, thanks so much for all your good work on all of our websites, and certainly pushing out the podcast later on, which, by the way, if you're watching us on Facebook Live, you can pick this up later. But you can also see this, and you can send out and share the archived footage here of Facebook Live, so feel free to go ahead and do that. Thanks ever so much for joining us here again today. Next week, we'll be talking with Deja Henry. We are looking for people, Christians who are doing good throughout Indianapolis. Please let us know folks that we need to have on the show. Thanks ever so much for being with us. We'll see you again next week.